Abu Bakr ibn Abi Quhafa, known in later tradition as Abu Bakr al-Siddiq, stands as one of the most influential figures in early Islamic history. His name is inseparable from the formative period following the death of Prophet Muhammad, and he is remembered in mainstream Islamic tradition as the first Caliph, a close companion, and a central figure in early leadership. Yet history and memory are not the same thing. Much of what people believe about Abu Bakr today has been shaped by centuries of religious instruction, political necessity, and theological reinforcement. A large portion of these narratives was written long after the events they describe, often under dynasties that benefited from portraying early leadership as divinely guided, unified, and beyond question. This does not mean Abu Bakr was insignificant or that his role was invented. It means that separating the historical Abu Bakr from the idealized Abu Bakr requires care, honesty, and restraint. The aim here is not to praise or condemn, but to understand. In this video, we will examine what can be reasonably established about his life, what can be inferred from early sources, and what belongs to later tradition. This approach does not weaken history, it strengthens it. A serious reading of early Islam requires this discipline, because once you blur the line between history and devotion, you stop learning and start repeating inherited assumptions. Abu Bakr's full name was Abdullah ibn Abi Quhafa. His father was Abu Quhafa, whose given name was Uthman ibn Amir, and his mother was Salma bint Sakhr, commonly known as al-Khair. He was born in Mecca, traditionally dated around 573 CE, though this date remains approximate. Pre-Islamic Arabia did not keep formal birth records, and most chronological details are reconstructed retrospectively. He belonged to the Banu Taym clan, a relatively minor branch of the Quraysh tribe. Unlike clans such as Banu Umayyah or Banu Makhzum, Banu Taym did not dominate Meccan politics, military affairs, or religious administration. This matters because later portrayals sometimes assume Abu Bakr held inherent tribal authority. Historically, this is unlikely. Sources describe Abu Bakr as a merchant, which fits well within Meccan society at the time. Mecca was a trade hub, and merchants formed its economic backbone. There is no evidence that Abu Bakr was unusually wealthy or politically influential prior to Islam, though he was likely comfortable enough to operate independently. Claims about his exceptional moral character before Islam are common in later biographies, but these descriptions follow a familiar pattern used for many early figures and cannot be independently verified. In other words, it is reasonable to say he was respected, but it is not responsible to repeat later perfect saint portraits as if they were contemporary facts. It is widely accepted that Abu Bakr and Prophet Muhammad knew each other before the emergence of Islam. Both were members of Quraysh society, both were merchants, and Mecca was a relatively small community. However, popular claims that they were inseparable childhood friends or lifelong companions are not historically demonstrable. These narratives appear primarily in later Sirah literature and function to retroactively strengthen Abu Bakr's legitimacy. When later writers needed to justify leadership decisions, the easiest tool was to push intimacy backward in time and present it as destiny. What can be said with more confidence is that Abu Bakr accepted Prophet Muhammad's message early and did not oppose him. Early acceptance does not necessarily imply leadership or influence, but it does indicate trust. It indicates that Abu Bakr, at minimum, was aligned with the movement early enough to become part of its core circle. Some traditions claim Abu Bakr was the first adult male to accept Islam. This claim varies by source and appears more theological than historical. Early conversion lists differ, and no neutral contemporary record exists. The responsible approach is to say he was among the early converts, without turning that into a measurable first-place trophy when the documentation cannot support it. It is within this context that Abu Bakr later became known as al-Siddiq, a title commonly understood to mean the affirming believer, or the one who affirms the truth. The name reflects his early acceptance of Prophet Muhammad's message and his willingness to affirm it without hesitation, rather than any formal leadership role during the Meccan period. Like many honorific titles, its prominence grows in later tradition. where affirmation of belief is elevated into a defining virtue and gradually linked to symbolic authority. During the Meccan phase of Islam, Abu Bakr did not function as a public leader or spokesperson. Prophet Muhammad remained the sole focal point of the movement. Abu Bakr's role appears to have been supportive rather than directive. Later sources emphasize his financial contributions and claim he freed several enslaved believers. These claims are plausible, but the exact scale and exclusivity of these actions are difficult to confirm beyond later reports. Importantly, Abu Bakr does not appear in early Meccan confrontations as a central figure in the way Prophet Muhammad does. Many persecution narratives focus on Prophet Muhammad and other vulnerable converts, which suggests Abu Bakr's political importance grew later, especially after Prophet Muhammad's death, rather than being a guaranteed second-in-command from the beginning. The migration from Mecca to Medina in 622 CE is one of the most securely established events in Islamic history. Abu Bakr accompanied Prophet Muhammad during this journey, and the migration itself is referenced in the Quran, though Abu Bakr is not named explicitly. The Quranic reference confirms the event of the journey and the presence of a companion, but it does not provide names or narrative detail. Many vivid elements associated with the migration, especially stories surrounding a cave episode, come from later narrative embellishments rather than early historical records. These details are widely circulated, but as history they are weaker than the core fact of the migration itself. Historically, we can say that Abu Bakr traveled with Prophet Muhammad during the Hijrah. Beyond that, serious historical method requires restraint. The early community preserved memory in different layers, some devotional and symbolic, others closer to straightforward reporting. Confusing the two is how legend gradually hardens into fact without anyone noticing. In Medina, Abu Bakr lived among the emigrants and participated in community life. While later tradition presents him as Prophet Muhammad's primary advisor, there is no evidence that he exercised independent authority during Prophet Muhammad's lifetime. Leadership remained entirely with Prophet Muhammad. Abu Bakr did not run a parallel administration, and he did not act as a ruler while Prophet Muhammad was alive. Later portrayals that depict him as second-in-command often reflect post-Prophet Muhammad political realities projected backward. This is a common phenomenon in historical writing. Later institutions and later hierarchies are projected onto earlier periods to make history look neat and inevitable. Abu Bakr's daughter, Aisha, married Prophet Muhammad, strengthening familial ties. This marriage elevated Abu Bakr socially, but it should not be retroactively interpreted as a political appointment or guarantee of leadership. In Arabian society, marriage built alliances and strengthened bonds, but it did not establish constitutional succession. Using the marriage as proof that Abu Bakr was destined to rule is later reasoning, not a documented political program from the lifetime of Prophet Muhammad. Prophet Muhammad's death in 632 CE was not just a personal loss, it was a political earthquake. For the first time, the community faced life without a living prophetic authority. This created shock, confusion, and immediate uncertainty about leadership, unity, and the future direction of the movement. Abu Bakr's most clearly documented public action in this moment is that he addressed the community and cited Quranic verses emphasizing that Prophet Muhammad was mortal. This matters historically because it shows Abu Bakr stepping forward as a stabilizing voice at a moment when the community was emotionally and politically vulnerable. This was not a small detail. Whoever controls the first interpretation after a leader's death often shapes the next era. Abu Bakr's intervention did not simply comfort people, it redirected the community from grief to continuity. It communicated that the religion was not supposed to collapse because the prophet died, and that the community had to organize itself. But we also need to be honest here. The moment after Prophet Muhammad's death was not calm or unanimous. Later tradition often paints a unified community that smoothly transferred leadership, but early reports indicate serious tension about who should lead and how that leadership should be established. This immediate aftermath is where history begins to turn into politics. not because people were evil, but because power vacuums create urgency. In urgent moments, decisions get made quickly, and those decisions later get justified as if they were always meant to happen. This is the context that leads directly into Saqifah. After the death of Prophet Muhammad, a critical meeting took place at Saqifah Banu Sa'idah. Saqifah was essentially a covered gathering place used for discussion and negotiation. It was a political space, a place where groups could meet and argue, not a place of revelation or divine appointment. The purpose of Saqifah was urgent. The community faced a leadership vacuum and feared division. The meeting was not a universal assembly. It involved select members of the Ansar and a few immigrants from Mecca. Not all key figures were present, and that fact alone is enough to challenge later portrayals of complete unanimity. The decision to appoint Abu Bakr was urgent and political. Disagreements existed, and the meeting functioned like a negotiation. This is why describing Saqifah as a revelation moment does not match the historical texture of the accounts. Saqifah was a political solution to a crisis, shaped by fear of fragmentation and the need to secure authority quickly. Later portrayals of unanimous consensus are contradicted by early reports. Even if one believes Abu Bakr was the best candidate, it does not follow that the process was unanimous, divine, or free of contest. Saqifah was a negotiation, not a revelation. Understanding Saqifah is crucial because this is where leadership becomes institutional. This is where authority begins to shift from prophecy to governance. Once that shift happens, the logic of politics enters the story permanently. Abu Bakr ruled for roughly 2 years, from 632 to 634 CE. The central challenge of his caliphate was not external conquest at first, but internal fragmentation following the death of Prophet Muhammad. Almost immediately, several Arab tribes withdrew political allegiance from Medina. Some refused to continue paying zakat to the center in Medina. Others followed rival claimants to leadership. Some rejected Medina's authority entirely. Historically, these conflicts are known as Hurub al-Rida, commonly translated as the Wars of Apostasy. But apostasy is a loaded later term. It is a theological framing that can flatten a complex reality into a simple moral slogan. The historical reality appears more mixed. Many of these disputes were political and economic, and only sometimes theological. Here is the key distinction that matters. Refusing zakat is not automatically the same as disbelief, as a historical description of what was happening on the ground. For some tribes, loyalty had been tied personally to Prophet Muhammad, not to a permanent state system. When Prophet Muhammad died, some tribes believed the contract ended. That does not necessarily mean they rejected belief in Allah. It can also mean they rejected the continuation of political submission to Medina. This is why the label apostasy can be misleading as a historical description. Some groups may have rejected faith entirely. Some may have followed alternative religious claimants, but others, based on early reports, appear to have continued religious practice while rejecting centralized authority, especially centralized collection of zakat. Abu Bakr viewed this fragmentation as an existential threat. If one tribe could refuse zakat while staying inside the community, then other tribes could pick and choose obligations, and the emerging state could dissolve. So Abu Bakr enforced uniform submission to Medina's authority. He treated refusal to pay zakat as rebellion that threatened unity. This is where the fusion begins to harden. Political loyalty becomes religious loyalty. Economic obligations become religious obligations enforced by state power. The line between belief and governance becomes harder to separate. Abu Bakr relied heavily on advisors, especially Umar ibn al-Khattab. His governing style was pragmatic and reactive. He did not create sophisticated institutions in his short reign. His focus was continuity, consolidation, and preventing collapse. Major administrative development came later, especially under Umar, but Abu Bakr set the precedent of central authority that must be obeyed. This period shaped a permanent fusion of religion and state authority. The community moved from prophetic leadership into political governance, and that governance quickly took on religious legitimacy. Abu Bakr's decisions during the post-prophet crisis helped cement a model where refusal to obey central authority could be treated as religious deviation. This fusion did not originate as a detailed Quranic political system. The Quran does not present a constitutional manual for caliphate structures. What happened historically was that crisis demanded quick decisions, and those decisions later became precedents, and those precedents later hardened into doctrine. Once refusal to pay zakat or refusal to recognize central leadership is treated as rebellion against the religion itself, the state gains enormous religious power. Political dissent becomes theological error. Opposition becomes deviation. And over time, rulers and scholars can claim that obedience to the ruler is obedience to Allah, even when that ruler is simply exercising political control. This is why Abu Bakr's legacy is not only about the past, it touches modern debates directly. Modern arguments about Islamic governance, about rulers and obedience, about rebellion and apostasy, and about the merging of mosque and state often trace back to assumptions that solidified in this era. When modern movements claim that rejecting a political authority equals rejecting Allah, they are echoing a historical precedent more than they are quoting a clear Quranic model. Recognizing this distinction does not weaken Islam. It restores clarity. It allows modern Muslims to separate what was historically necessary in a crisis from what is divinely commanded as permanent law. Abu Bakr ruled under intense instability. His choices can be understood as crisis management. But crisis management should not be treated as revelation. When people sanctify political precedents, they turn history into theology, and theology into a tool of power. Despite Abu Bakr's central political role after the death of Prophet Muhammad, his contribution to the Hadith corpus is strikingly minimal. According to classical Hadith collections, Abu Bakr is reported to have narrated approximately 142 Hadiths in total, and only a portion of these are considered authentic by later Hadith scholars. This figure is accepted across traditional sources and is not disputed. The contrast becomes sharper when compared to Abu Huraira, who is credited with thousands of narrations, despite having spent far less time with Prophet Muhammad than Abu Bakr did. This imbalance raises serious historical questions. If Abu Bakr was the closest companion, the first caliph, and uniquely qualified to preserve the Prophet's teachings, why does he appear so rarely in the Hadith record? Why is the bulk of what later Muslims call prophetic sunnah transmitted through figures who rose to prominence much later? Traditional explanations usually claim that Abu Bakr avoided narrating Hadith out of caution or fear of error. But even if this is true, it weakens the argument that Hadith transmission was essential to preserving Islam. The most powerful early leader did not prioritize it. From a Quran-based perspective, this makes sense. The Quran presents itself as complete, detailed, and sufficient guidance. Abu Bakr's minimal reliance on narration suggests that early leadership was not built around preserving thousands of sayings, but around maintaining social and political stability after Prophet Muhammad's death. Abu Bakr ruled, governed, and made decisions without leaving behind a large body of reported prophetic statements. His authority did not depend on Hadith transmission. This directly challenges the later assumption that Islam is inseparable from a massive Hadith corpus. If Hadith were essential as a second revelation, the earliest and most authoritative leader would logically have been its primary transmitter. History shows the opposite. Abu Bakr's legacy, therefore, is not that of a narrator or jurist, but of a transitional ruler navigating crisis. The religious weight later assigned to Hadith comes from subsequent generations, not from Abu Bakr's own practice. Understanding this helps separate early history from later theology, and prevents projecting later religious structures backward onto figures who did not operate within them. Abu Bakr died in 634 CE after a period of illness. There is no strong historical support for claims of assassination or foul play. Before his death, he designated Umar ibn al-Khattab as his successor. This decision reinforced the idea that leadership transition could be decided through elite selection rather than broad communal consensus. Historically, Abu Bakr was a transitional leader operating under extraordinary pressure. He stabilized authority after the death of Prophet Muhammad and prevented immediate political fragmentation. That is a major historical achievement. Notably, he accomplished this without leaving behind a significant body of hadith narration, reinforcing that early leadership was exercised through governance and precedent, not through transmitting a secondary body of revelation. At the same time, his reign laid foundations that merged religious belonging with political obedience and faith with state power. These foundations are not laid out in the Quran as an explicit constitutional model. They became embedded through precedent, practice, and later interpretation. Recognizing both achievements and consequences is essential. Abu Bakr was neither infallible nor insignificant. He was a historical actor whose decisions shaped centuries of governance assumptions. If you want to understand why religion and state became so fused in later Islamic history, you cannot avoid this era. Abu Bakr ibn Abi Quhafa remains central not because of perfection, but because of timing. His leadership came at a moment when every decision carried lasting consequences. History does not demand reverence, it demands understanding.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.
We're not here to issue fatwas or change anyone's beliefs. These videos simply reflect our own understanding and perspective. Our goal is to inspire you to think, reflect, and read the Quran, just as Allah commanded, and discover the real Islam for yourself.